Let's just get started. I'm going to talk about DragonRuby, and let's talk about apps, like real native apps instead of web apps. And let me get, there we go. So I'm Lori Olson, as Emily said. I'm the founder of, I call it the WNDX School. You can call it WNDX too. That's like not a problem. But you know, I like to just throw some vowels in there. It's easier to say. So why DragonRuby? So what is it about DragonRuby? Okay, so you may have heard about DragonRuby, but there's also RubyMotion. Okay, so now these are two products by an overall organization referred to as DragonRuby. And they have two different purposes, which I'll go into. But first, just remember that DragonRuby is Ruby, and also RubyMotion is Ruby. These are both Ruby, which is great. So why do we use DragonRuby or RubyMotion? Why would we not use, say, for mobile development, Objective-C or Swift? Why would we use DragonRuby? Why wouldn't we use Unity or Godot to do our game development? Yes, I see the comments in the chat. I agree, Ruby is great, and we do trust Ruby, yes. Because Ruby's philosophy is that it's a language designed to make programmers happy. I mean, how can you not want to use a language with that kind of a philosophy? And that's really my choice. So Objective-C, Swift, C++, it's really team, I am not happy. I've done actual paid work in Objective-C and C++, and no, I was not a happy camper when I was using those. And I see Sarah is saying React Native does not make her happy. And I'd have to agree with that because I played with that a little bit, and no, it doesn't make me happy. So just like Objective-C, I have used it. The language syntax just makes my eyes bleed. I don't like looking at it. So when you use RubyMotion, you get nice readable code. And that, I think, is a huge bonus. Similarly, like here is on the top, you can see some Objective-C. And then on the bottom, you can see the equivalent in RubyMotion. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to look at all these brackets and variable declarations. I kind of just like my Ruby and my nice little array shortcuts and everything that makes using arrays awesome in Ruby is there in RubyMotion. And again, this is just another example of Objective-C using defaults in your application. The Objective-C is on the top. And if you use a nice handy Ruby gem called Bubble Wrap, this is what the equivalent code will be in your RubyMotion to save a default setting for your user. I don't know about you, but I kind of like the one statement instead of 3 statements to do the same thing. So Swift, why wouldn't you want to use Swift? Well, this is why. Swift is really moving fast and they're breaking things all the time. I mean, I've watched in the mobile application world, I follow a lot of mobile app developers on Twitter, and oh, they get so frustrated when Swift changes yet again and breaks everything. Now, it has slowed down a bit. They did kind of lock things down in 2019, but really they spent like 4 years just like jerking developers' chains. And I don't ever think that's a great idea. I think that they could have done things better. So let's talk about DragonRuby. So it is what gives you a 2D game engine and lets you create 2D games that run on desktop, mobile, and console natively. This isn't interpretive code. It actually is natively compiled code. So very fast and very tight, small game engine. RubyMotion, along with running, it has to run on your Apple computer, but it lets you do development for iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, tvOS. You can develop apps for all of these using RubyMotion. Emily says, how did I not know about DragonRuby? I don't know. I talk about it all the time. Okay. And you get to use all your familiar Ruby tools like Rake to manage all your build system, and Ruby Gems to manage all your libraries, Bundler to manage all your library dependencies. So you get to use all of these familiar tools that you as Rubyists already know to do your RubyMotion or DragonRuby development. And you do not have to use Xcode, which I think is a huge plus because I really dislike Xcode. It doesn't matter how many times they make changes and updates, it's still a really horrible IDE. So you can choose to use whatever editor you want to do your DragonRuby or RubyMotion development. So if you like Vim, use that. If you like VS Code, use that. If you like RubyMine, use that. If you like Emacs, use that. Okay, so live demo time. Let's actually get some of this stuff working here. Oh yeah, move to the other screen and let's. Oh, of course it did that to me. Okay, let's go down here. This isn't helping me at all. Just give me a second here. I normally have a much better setup on my screen, but right now I'm working on my dining room table because my office is being renovated. Okay, so this is a great way for you to look at DragonRuby without downloading a thing, without installing a thing. You can go to fiddle.dragonruby.org. So remember that. And in fact, I think you might want to do this along with me because Zoom screen updates are not going to do justice to looking at this. So right now you can go to fiddle.dragonruby.org and you can go ahead and look at any of these tutorials. So you just have to click here, and in this left-hand pane, you're going to see actual code. And in the right hand, and let me just go and turn off the camera so you can see. So yes, in the this little tutorial here, you can see all the code that generates what you can see down in this right-hand pane. And it's not very, sorry. It is not very much code, and you can do all these primitives. And what you get here is this method called tick, and tick runs 60 times per second. So you always have to add things to your args outputs to show up on the screen here. And I hope you can see that there is a green line here that is basically pulsing. It is really faded and it comes in stronger and stronger until it gets really thick and then it goes away again. So we're just pulsing through. So that's our first demo. We can go to the next step here. And now we're looking at borders. And you should see one of the borders that you are looking at here is fading out because we are giving it an alpha in its color so that it fades and goes more and more opaque through all the tick counts. So this is just a great little way of showing stuff disappearing in your game. Here's some borders that are filled in. And again, we're doing the same thing with our red solid that is fading away. So this is a really cool little demo here. But what's fabulous about this fiddle.dragonruby.org is that you can actually hand it any old URL that has some of this code in it, and it will demonstrate stuff for you, just like you are seeing on the screen right now. I think this is a fabulous way to teach people game development. And in fact, if you go to DragonRuby.School, that ends up at my WNDX School at the Dragon Ruby tutorial, which is free, and you can sign up for that tutorial and go through. My intern redid it last year, so the person you'll see on the screen is my intern, and he walks through all of these steps. Okay, so that's enough Dragon Ruby. Let's do a quick switch over here to RubyMine, and let's look at some code for RubyMotion. So this is some code that runs and does an application that runs on an Apple TV. Okay, I created this demo for a conference talk. And this is how all RubyMotion apps start with a class called the app delegate. And I'm using something called promotion, which is the PM delegate there. And we're getting some locations. Let me see. Oh, I have to get my mouse into the right window here. And some locations, which are simply some names of cities and their latitude and longitude locations, so I can get their weather information. So I'm grabbing those locations and creating screens with those locations here. This is all standard Ruby code. And then we're using something from promotion called open tab bar. And I want to create tabs for each of these locations on the screen so I can display their weather data. So the weather data class is really quite simple. I have a couple of class level methods here to read in from the locations JSON file and parse that data. And then we return that to a locations instance variable, or no, class level variable here. And that's what we're using back in our app delegate. That's our locations. And we're using each of those locations to create a weather screen and setting that screen's location to be each location. So let's look at the weather screen. This is again using promotion. It's a promotion screen. And up here, we're using another gem called bubble wrap and using something called key value observation. So when I switch to different tabs, I get a weather update happening. So when we load up this screen, this is all standard stuff in promotion. When I load up the screen, I create 3 things to display on the screen, labels. There's a symbol for the little weather icon, and then a temperature and a weather description. And then I'm observing the weather variable. This is the key value observation, and then updating the weather displayed on the screen. Let's just actually go. I'd love to show you all this actually compiling and running, but it takes a little while because it does compile and run. Let's get the simulator up here and actually go and select this app. Okay, this is what this app looks like. It's got 3 tabs across the top from Vienna. That's where I was giving this conference talk. And there's Calgary. That's where I used to live. And Lethbridge, where I live right now. This is the current weather right now. It's 10 degrees Celsius here. It's 9.5 degrees in Calgary and partly cloudy. And it's 14 and overcast in Vienna. So quick look back here. All that I got from a cool little library called CZ Weather, which is an actual CocoaPod that is used. It's written in Objective-C, but I can totally use it in my RubyMotion project. And I use that in my RubyMotion project by, here's my rake file, and I just say, I want to use the CocoaPod CZ Weather Kit. So this is what your rake file looks like, and all it does is define your project. It's using a font to get those cool little climate icons, and there you go. So this is a fairly straightforward sort of project, and let me just show. And this is the URL. I'm going to paste that into the chat so you can all go and look at it yourself. And if you go to my school, there's a Getting Started with RubyMotion. Again, totally free class you can take to get set up. I will say, unfortunately, you can't do the tvOS stuff using the free version of RubyMotion, but you can do all the iOS and macOS stuff that you want. And that should be it.